We'll get started in few minutes, but before that, please let us know in the chat where you're joining from and how's the weather at your end. Also, please make sure to change your chat setting to everyone so that all your chat messages are visible to everybody present in this present meeting. Oh, that's nice. Everybody's joining from different locations. That's nice. That's nice. So I'm from southern part of India, Hyderabad. Well, it's lovely to know that everybody's from different places. We would like to thank everybody to join this session. We have our speaker Stella today, and even she is from Chicago. So we have different people from Chicago, London, and Boulder, Texas. So it's great to know. Please let us know in the chat when everybody is ready so that we can get started with our today's session, which is going to be amazing. And also make sure to add your questions in the Q&A chat option available in the Zoom meeting so that we can get them answered by Stella. And with Stella, we also have one of our friends, Fatima, in the call, who can support us with your questions. So once you're ready, please make sure to write a yes in the chat option so that we can get started with our today's session. Oh, so many yeses, that's great. Thank you. So let's get started with today's session. Before we get started with today's session, I would like to let you know about Women Who Code as an organization, because I work as a volunteer with Women Who Code, and I've been working with Women Who Code as a volunteer from almost 3 years now, and it's been an amazing experience. You always have all global women supporting you whenever you need. So it's all about the support needed when it is required, right? So that's how I made my journey pretty well with the community, and I encourage everybody to join our community as well. Women Who Code mission is to empower diverse women to excel in their technology careers. And the main vision of Women Who Code is to support technical industry where diverse women and historically excluded people thrive at different levels for different roles. As every organization has a different code of conduct, even Women Who Code has a code of conduct, and we are an inclusive community and dedicated to provide empowering experiences for everyone who participates or supports our community. So if there are any incidents which you have come across through the community, then you can always refer to womenwhocode.com/code of conduct. And from there, one of our team members would be reaching out to you to solve your issues or concerns. So we also have many amazing events coming up once after our today's event is completed. For checking out our upcoming or past events, you can refer to womenwhocode.com/cloud. So you can find all the events available there with us. And yes, we are also available on different social platforms, and that is the QR code which is available. You can use it for having Slack on your devices, and you can get started by being a partner of us. I mean, being a woman, a volunteer with us. So you can contribute in any way. You can either be great at volunteering with hosting or moderating or organizing. You can have many opportunities once you join the community if you're interested to contribute any way possible. So we can we can stay connected that way through different social platforms. And yes, so today we are having speaker who is Stella Camacho. She works as an engineering manager at cars.com, and she belongs to Chicago suburbs. She also worked as a dive master, scuba diving dive master in the past, while she used to work at Manila. And with Stella, we also have Fatima, who works as an intern with Stella. And I would like to pass on this session to Stella now so that she can start with the technical terms.
Thanks, Maitri. Let me go and share my screen then.
Sure.
Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Just gonna go and make sure I have all the stuff. Okay, cool. So I'm Stella Camacho. Basically, I worked in the tech field for over 20 years now. Like Maitri said, I started with a bachelor's in accounting and tried different things. First I tried to become an accountant, right? A public accountant. I was a CPA for, I think, exactly 6 months. I realized that I love accounting. Unfortunately, it was very, I don't think it allowed me to be creative. It did have that aspect, which I apparently I really was looking for. So I tried other things. I tried to work as a scuba diving dive master. The plan was to become an instructor, but I actually realized that was not a good path for me as well. That lasted for about a year. And then I ended up actually teaching accounting and computers for business. And then I moved here, realized that definitely computers were my thing. I've always been a geek. As a kid, I used to pick locks. So I know this is recorded. So Mom, yes, I used to pick your locks as a kid. But I would just look and then put everything back. That was just something that I did as a kid. I still own a set of lockpicks, and every chance I get, I actually practice. So that's just something that I like to do. Anyway, we also have Fatima. She is an intern at cars.com. She basically helps out with our security initiatives, and you will hear more from her in during this webinar. So let's start with cloud security, a minimum security baseline. So why is cloud security important? I'm not sure if how many of you here are experienced in the field of security, but security is pretty complex. And traditionally, if you have a good combination of tools, teams, and training, you can usually prevent. It's a pretty good formula to prevent catastrophic security incidents. But with the advent of cloud services, there is an added complexity of who does what. Why? Because the cloud services are usually managed, right? And then you basically take care of some of the stuff, and then the cloud provider takes care of the other stuff. Plus, there is a possible steep learning curve for folks that don't know how to know how to use the cloud services properly, which means there's going to be additional training as well required for your teams. And then finally, cloud services are pay-per-use, and cost is closely tied with security, because if you basically if you incur too much cost, right, then your business will not succeed, which basically is a fail on your security initiative. So this is why AWS Startup Security Baseline is pretty important. This guide was last updated by AWS in May of this year, and all this information is actually already available. All I'm doing is I'm sharing my personal experiences with these controls. And why AWS? AWS is the cloud provider that I'm most familiar with at this time. And I've worked with both GCP and Azure as well. And security best practices are also in the slide in the last slide. Okay. So why is cloud security? Why is this an important guide? I don't know if you can see that, but there are 20 AWS security services as of last week. And obviously not all of them fit your use case, but it's a lot, right? And most smaller companies, small to medium companies, do not have a dedicated security team. Or if they do, it's usually not a cloud security team. So this guide, I feel, is a super important guide. Before we talk about the guide, I just want to review basic security design principles. This is a whole talk in itself, so I'm not going to go into every single principle. I'm going to highlight the things that are my favorite. I like applying security at all layers. Why? Because if you have layers in your security, if you do get a breach, I'm sorry, it's not an if, it's a when you get breached, only that layer will be vulnerable, right? And you still keep everything else safe. And then my least favorite is keep people away from data. Why is that my least favorite? Because I feel like even if you have a ton of tools to reduce the risk of human errors in exposing sensitive data, it's, humans are just prone to hacking, and it's really very hard to stop that. So, but yeah, you can always try. Again, this is basically the slide that is probably super popular. Maybe some of you have seen this. This is AWS's shared responsibility model. It just emphasizes that the customer is responsible for security in the cloud, because you still have your code, your operating system, you still have your firewall configurations, while AWS is responsible for the security of the cloud. So it makes sure that the infrastructure layer is more secure, or most of it, because there's still portions of the infrastructure layer that you need to be paying attention to. And then finally, before we talk about the guide, this is a disclaimer. The guide is appropriate for the beginning stages of your journey. The assumption is that you don't have a lot of folks on your team, and that's why you don't have a lot of options. And therefore, if you have to focus on only a few things, these should be the things that you need to focus on, the controls that you need to work on. Okay. So finally, what is AWS Startup Security Baseline? I basically just wrote up the definition of AWS. It's a set of controls, and it creates a minimum foundation of businesses to build a secure environment in AWS. The two categories of these controls are accounts and workloads. And then just a summary of what the account categories are. It usually has to do with user setup, user access, policies and permissions, and monitoring the use of those accounts. As far as workloads are concerned, it includes securing your resources and code, as well as your data, and recommendations such as encryption and reducing scope are usually part of the controls. Okay, let's start with controls for accounts. There are 12, and I don't think we have all day because because time is an issue. I'm going to talk about the ones that are the ones that I've actually had personal experiences with that are a little bit more exciting, or at least more important as well. So don't worry, don't have to go through all the 12. Although all these 12 are really, really important. That's why they're here, right? Let's start with the first one. Setting account level contact, setting account level contact with a valid email distribution list. So a valid distribution list will allow you to add you or remove users as necessary. This is critical because when you're making account changes, it has to be, sometimes the requirement to make the account changes is pretty fast. When I was a consultant, one of the accounts I worked on basically had an email address of an ex-employee. And they had to make a quick change. They had to make a change in the account, and AWS was like, "We need this email address." That email address was no longer valid, so we basically had to get the finance folks involved in updating the contact information, and that took a few days. Luckily, again, this happened when there was no emergency, which sometimes happens. Okay, the next one is a combination of 3 controls because they're very closely related. Basically, restrict use of the root user, require MFA, assign permissions by using IAM user groups. So these 3 are, they're basically tied to each other because as soon as you create a root user, as soon as you create your account, your AWS account, a root user will be created. At that point, you need to immediately create users and user groups and make sure that they also require MFA. And if you have created keys for IAM keys for your root user, make sure you delete them. The typical user groups that you will be creating are tied to roles like administrators, developers, and QA. And an example, permissions, for example, in prod would be like developers need access to RDS and IAM. And they may need only read access to those services, but maybe for S3, they need read and write access. Then maybe your QA team will need read access only to all those 3 services. However, in non-prod, maybe all of your groups or roles will have access to read and write access to all the services. So those are just examples of that. This summer we actually switched to our basically our SSO service, and Fatima was actually able to help us with that, and she did a lot of this. Fatima, do you wanna try to recall the most fun parts of basically adding MFA and talking to users and walking them through with MFA access?
Yeah, sure. So during the summer, I migrated all active prod and non-prod IAM users to Jump Cloud, which consisted of a few prerequisites such as installing SAML to AWS and uninstalling the AWS Vault. And then there was a series of instructions that users had to follow to configure the AWS CLI. So I worked one-on-one with different folks from the customer support and platform operations team, and basically assisted them with their migration throughout the summer.
Yeah, I think Fatima found out that the users were normally it should take like a few hours, right? I mean, to take care of, I don't know, how many did you migrate? I think there were like a couple of dozen that you had to migrate, but normally it would take only, what, maybe in theory like 10 minutes each person, but what was the reason why it took a few weeks instead of only a few days?
Yeah, I think the main reason was that people were different folks from different teams were unfamiliar with using the terminal and like operating like their command line tools and things like that. So I think that's what kind of caused like a gap. But then we were able to work one-on-one with different people and help them migrate easily. And I think
Yes.
there was also a script that they had to download and then run that script. And a lot of people needed help with that. So I think that's what delayed the process.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The human factor is always a challenge. That's why when I talked to you about this project, I said, be patient, and it can take a while. And we had that one guy that went on vacation, right? And it took 2 weeks before we could like migrate him. Anyway, but yeah, that's what happens in real life, in the real world. Okay, let's move on. Thank you, Fatima. Let's move on to the next slide. Sure, I have this. Okay, cool. So the next one talks about enforcing password policies. I added a link to the article that I used for this particular slide. How long does it take to hack a password? So the interesting thing is if you only had like all numbers in your password with 14 characters or less, it takes less than 3 minutes. How does this get hacked? There's a variety of software out there, really. So if you have a decent computer and with decent computing power, this can happen, right? And then if you add lowercase letters, if it's lowercase letters only, 12 characters or less than 2 days. So apparently letters are a little bit less complex. I personally use the combo password, and I use the upper lowercase, number, symbol, and 12 characters. So in theory, it will take a hacker about 3,000 years. I'm sure I have no idea how they came up with 3,000 years, but the most important aspect, I think, of this study was that if you have a combo password, but it only has 8 characters, it actually takes less than 39 minutes to hack it. For me, that's pretty mind-blowing. Here I am trying to come up with like a really complex password, but apparently, 8 characters, 39 minutes. That's crazy. Okay, but don't worry. Bottom line is hackers are usually opportunists. They will break only into easy to hack systems unless they are specifically targeting your organization, right? So I'm not sure how many people remember the Sony Pictures hack in 2014, but there was a movie. It had to do with the movie The Interview, which was basically a spoof of Kim Jong-un, who's still the president of North Korea. And the hackers basically, they call themselves Guardians of Peace. They basically threatened to release 100 terabytes of movies and files if the interview was released. Initially, I think Sony Pictures said, yes, we're going to stop the release of the movie. But then after a lot of pressure, they ended up doing a soft release, which means that they released it to only some movie houses, and then they, I think, released it online. If you research that hack, the users used a malware to get into the system. What does that mean? That means it has to do with human frailty and vulnerability. Then they were able to find the right user with elevated privileges, which gave them access to the unreleased movies. By the way, they finally released 5 of the movies and a lot of private files, emails, talking about all sorts of things. Pretty interesting stuff if you really want to get into it. But yeah, that was in 2014. Okay, next control. We need to monitor costs by enabling budgets. Again, cost, because cloud services are pay-per-use. Costs are pretty relevant because if you don't monitor your costs, then your business isn't going to make the kind of money that it's supposed to make to stay afloat, right? So the control uses your traditional or your standard cost management service. I think it comes with Cost Explorer. And you don't even require a security service for this. AWS Budgets is what it's called. And it allows you to set a budget based on your historical spend. You can put a threshold and then configure an alert. I know that we use this at CARS at this time. we use something a little bit differently. It's a cousin of AWS budgets. It's called Cost Anomaly Service. And we get an email whenever there is every time it hits a threshold. So what do? You set up a threshold, and then you want to get an alert for that. If the threshold is too, then you can tweak the threshold, right? Sometimes if you want to change the cost, like sometimes you may get too many alerts for things that are not really important or important as far as changes are concerned, then you can tweak it. But you can definitely get in trouble if you don't monitor your cost. In the past, I've actually personally seen 2 mid-sized companies get hacked with Bitcoin miners and by Bitcoin miners, and they got charged thousands of dollars from the service that got provisioned during that attack. So yes, monitoring your cloud spend in real time could help detect this type of breach. The next one is enable and respond to guard duty notifications. Okay, guard duty is my, I was thinking about this last week. I think guard duty is my second favorite security service. My first one is IAM, which is Identity Access Management. Why is guard duty really important? It's because it's a threat detection service that can find potentially malicious and unauthorized behavior. And you can enable CloudWatch to get the alerts. In my experience, and this is what I've been working on AWS cloud environments since 2010, so it's 12 years. Guard duty is relatively new. I don't remember, but it's been around for a few years. 99% of the time, these findings basically show us that, like known users. Like I think last week, Fatima, you showed up in the guard duty finding, and it basically just says that you did a read-only access for Security Hub services, which is accurate, right? But yeah, 1% of the time, these also have important warnings because they actually show brute force attempts. And I've seen this also very recently, like in a non-prod environment, somebody accidentally spins up an EC2 instance with wide open permissions to the public. Guard duty will basically can alert you for this type of activity. Also, guard duty watches out for suspicious outbound activity. So if it thinks that there is some malware somewhere hidden in your environment, it's trying to reach out to probably a home server, it actually can detect that. In the case of Sony pictures, they were not actually using cloud services at the time, but if they were, or if they were paying attention to their outbound network activity, they would have figured out that somebody was copying 100 terabytes of data, because I'm pretty sure I think the hack took over a month to get completed. So that was a big miss on their end. Okay, the next control is to monitor and resolve high-risk findings with Trusted Advisor. So Trusted Advisor, I think, is my maybe top 4 tool, security tool. It is very important because it doesn't, if you look here at the dashboard on the left side, it also addresses cost optimization, performance, security, and fault tolerance. So it actually covers a whole set of categories to make your AWS environments more efficient, right? So I definitely recommend using this tool. However, if you actually need business support, the business support level, which means you have to pay more if you're using developer support right now or not, or basic support. But I highly recommend if you want to do this the right way, I recommend you pay for business support at least for a few months while you're trying to figure out all of your security initiatives. Okay, the next one. Actually, that's it. We're done with account controls. This is a bonus. Security Hub used to be one of my least favorite security services. because I don't know how many of you have used Nessus in the past, but basically there are a lot of false positives. And to get through all the false positives is really painful. In fact, the person that knows this very closely or has had a lot of experience with this is Fatima. Fatima, do you want to share your experiences with your favorite service, Security Hub?
Yeah, sure. So what is AWS Security Hub? It's basically a cloud security management service that provides you with a set of automated security controls called the AWS Foundational Security Best Practices. And this essentially performs security best practice checks, aggregates alerts, and enables automated remediation. And each control also has a specific severity score. So this basically helps you prioritize your remediation efforts, and all the findings are also continuously updated every 24 to 48 hours and sometimes even faster. So this illustration basically shows how AWS Security Hub works. So it quickly assesses your high priority security alerts and security posture across all of your accounts and regions, and then it checks all your services, whether it be Amazon Guard Duty, Amazon System Manager, CloudFront, S3, and then it notifies you with these findings and allows you to take action by investigating them or following through a set of remediation instructions. And then on the next slide here, you'll see kind of like the layout of Security Hub. So this is a single standardized data format for all your findings. At the top, you'll find your system security score. And then in the breadcrumb navigation line, you'll see how many checks have passed and how many failed. To remediate these failed findings, you can also start by clicking the title link, which is right next to the ID. And this will take you to a set of remediation instructions and explain why that specific check has failed. Next to the compliance status, you'll also see a column titled Severity, and this indicates the severity of your findings. So there's 4 main terms that they use: critical, high, medium, and low. Sometimes it can be overwhelming, because I remember once we had 4,162 findings in one compliance check. And in these situations, we need to write an AWS CLI script, which we could run through the terminal, because it would be absolutely tedious if we did it through the console. And just imagine having to solve 4,162 checks all individually. But then again, I don't mean to scare anyone. There are many false positives or low risk findings that you don't really need to worry about.
Yes, and to be honest, Fatima, again, you're the reason why Security Hub has made it now to my, okay, it's now top 10, not quite up there with top 5, but it is a top 10 favorite security service, because it is pretty thorough. Unfortunately, like most thorough tools, it's like it sometimes also catches a lot of false positives. So just a quick thing, again, there's lots of documentation on Security Hub, and feel free to if there is one extra tool that you want to use, what do you call this, in your security initiatives, I would highly recommend Security Hub. Okay, let's go to the next set of controls. Controls for workloads. Okay, so this one has 15 controls. Why? Because workloads are, the bread and butter of your environment, right? But I'm only going to talk about 4, because to be honest, we're running out of time. I've been trying to speak a little bit slower now that I feel like we're not as rushed for time anymore. So let's start with the first control for workloads. Okay, the first one is using IAM roles for compute environment permissions. So for those who are not as familiar with IAM roles, basically it represents a set of permissions. It can be assumed by either a user or a service. Most of the time when we use IAM credentials, that's your IAM keys as well as the secrets, you're going to have to like take great care in managing these credentials. Why? Because if somebody has access to them, unauthorized access to them, they can cause a lot of chaos. Again, the example would be Bitcoin mining. And then obviously that person can basically, if those keys have elevated privileges, they can do a lot of damage to your business, right? So this removes that risk completely. No need to manage credentials at all. You just use IAM roles. Now, how do you do this? Of course, it doesn't apply to all the use cases, but a good example is if you have an EC2 instance that needs read access to an S3 bucket. The traditional way of doing that is allowing an IAM user or service to put the key information to store it in that EC2 instance, and then that EC2, and then you use that when you run your commands to access the S3 bucket. However, you won't need to do that if you use IAM roles, because you don't need to even put those keys anymore. You don't even create them. All you have to do is basically to create an IAM role and then connect it or assign it to the EC2 instance, and it will do the same thing. And this is definitely more secure than storing your IAM keys in the EC2 instance. So yes. Okay, next one is Systems Manager versus SSH or RDP. So Systems Manager is not that new, but when it first came out, it was a little bit hard to implement because there were a lot of prerequisites, and I think it did not support all the operating system versions. Because I remember looking at it and I'm like, oh, that's super exciting that they have this now, because I think GCP had this version of the service. I can't remember what it's called, but they had this before AWS came up with theirs. But anyway, this eliminates the need for jump boxes or Bastion hosts. Bastion hosts and jump boxes are synonyms, right? They're the same thing. It basically allows you to connect to your private resources from the public. So basically, ideally, when you build your resources, you want to make sure that you separate your private resources from your publicly exposed resources. But at some point in time, you have to get to those private resources. So what people normally do is they create a jump box or a Bastion host. Now you can finally do without that. You don't need that anymore. You can also remove ports 22 and 3389 from your security groups, because to be honest, it takes, I did find a study, it takes less than 10 hours before a newly spun up EC2 instance starts getting its first brute force attacks. It's pretty crazy. And I know this from experience because I keep track of, I log some of this. Sometimes I put a honeypot and spin up an EC2 instance, put it out in public, open up port 22 to everyone, and sure enough, you'll see all these attempts at like trying to guess the password or trying to connect via SSH. So yeah, that's a real thing. The good thing about Systems Manager though now is that it uses pre-built AMIs, which means that the agents are pre-installed, and now the agents are a lot more compatible. There's a lot more compatibility with a variety of operating system versions. And there are also other minor prerequisites, but they're pretty easy to meet now. So Systems Manager is definitely maybe number 6 on my list of favorite security services. Okay, this is pretty straightforward. Encryption, EBS and RDS. Just a quick background for those who are unfamiliar. EBS volumes are used by EC2 instances, mainly for storage. They're like virtual drives. It's like a hard drive, right? But obviously they're virtual. And then RDS is your AWS managed database service. So if you encrypt these two services, if you make sure that they're encrypted, if there is accidental or unauthorized use of their snapshots, for example, or somebody is able to get copies of of EBS volumes or your RDS snapshots, they will not be able to decrypt it. Otherwise, if you don't encrypt your volumes or your RDS, basically people will be able to, if they do get a hold of the snapshots, or for example, they're able to connect to these, they'll easily be able to get into your data. Okay, and I think this might be the final slide. Yeah, it might be. Restrict network access with security groups. Okay, security groups is definitely in my top 5 of security services. By default, security groups allow all outbound traffic, but don't allow inbound traffic, which is, a really good way to set it up. So you actually have to you actually have to create inbound security groups. I was trying to say purpose, never mind. Anyway, there is a really cool part of security groups where you can basically remove outbound traffic rules. Now, why is this really cool? That's because if you suspect that your EC2 instance has been compromised, you can remove the outbound rules to stop the attack or malware activity. And this will give your forensic team or anybody that's interested, like me, to log into the EC2 instance and run diagnostic tools, which are easily downloadable, by the way, on the internet, and investigate while the malware is still possibly active. Yes, I've done this a couple of times. It is pretty cool. Outside of being cool, what it can do is it can help you determine how, if you can identify what type of malware it is, you can also track it and see if you can find it in the rest of, you can scan for it more easily in your environment, right? That's the main reason why you want to be able to diagnose it. Okay, so what is next? Now that you have all of these, now that you have this guide, what are the important tools? At the very least, I would highly recommend use Trusted Advisor and address all of the security findings. Now, the good thing is Trusted Advisor will also categorize the findings from the higher or critical or high all the way to low. So you can take your time for the lower findings, and then obviously focus on the higher findings first. I would also follow the account recommendations, which takes a few hours to complete versus weeks, right? So focus on the account controls first, and definitely go to the workshop. I think the workshop is awesome. I didn't finish the whole thing. I probably did a third of it. I went through a third of it. It's very, very helpful, very useful, very easy to follow. It's also in the link in the last slide. And when you can, add the services that are not part of this guide: Security Hub, Macy, IAM Identity Center, formerly AWS SSO, which is actually a top 5 favorite of mine, AWS Organizations and Control Tower. Those are all things to do after this. And that's a whole nother talk, which obviously we don't have time for. But that's it today. And hopefully, yeah, if you have any questions, I'm going to be around for a little bit. Thank you again, Fatima. And I'm not sure. Yeah, I can stop sharing, I think, for questions. Mayatri?
Yes, Stella. It was a great presentation, though. You have covered a lot of AWS services like Trusted Advisor, IAM, Guard Duty, and others. So I think it was a lot of knowledge for us to know about. And thank you, Fatima, also to collaborate with Stella and share your knowledge with us today. Let's wait if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Stella, for that very insightful, specific, and actionable session. We do see a few questions trickling in, so I'll start taking them. The first one is, Was it easy to get started using AWS? And even I'm very curious about it. What was your experience within the organization where you have developers who are just so focused on their code? And probably there's a bit of reluctance to know more about the cloud. We see these issues all the time where a developer has created a public S3 bucket, has an encrypted objects in the bucket, or is creating a public EC2 instance. So what has been your experience in using AWS or getting
Yeah,
started?
no, yeah, I think that so like I said, I think I started in 2010, and at that time, to be honest, AWS did not have a lot of services. They basically had and everything was pretty wide open. So it was like the wild, wild west. But generally speaking, and having said that, yes, it is pretty easy to start. I think the biggest challenge now is there's too much information. Before there was no information, and now there's too much information. I would start with looking at a certification. I believe that there's a lot of free or inexpensive training for an AWS Cloud Practitioner certificate. I would start with that. If you can do that, it will immediately allow you to. It will expose you to all of the really core services of AWS, and then you can move forward from there.
Aparna, I think you are on mute.
Sorry, this is another question that we received. What's your favorite or least favorite technology in the cloud industry? Do you want me to repeat that again?
Least favorite
And most
technology.
favorite.
Oh, most favorite. Well,
Most and
again,
least.
oh, sorry, most what?
Most favorite and least favorite.
Okay. Yeah, so I think I'm a little biased, right? AWS is, if you're talking about cloud services, if that's what you're talking about, or are you talking about services? But if you're talking about like what do you call this? The cloud services, AWS is my favorite. My least favorite is Microsoft Azure because they are not, in my opinion, they're not there yet in terms of security. So yes, I'm not sure if that's the question, but if that was the question, picking among the three cloud providers, that's my answer. The three top cloud providers, that's my answer.
Thank you. And just out of curiosity, do you have the AWS security baseline implemented within your organization? And how long did it take you on that journey to feel secure in the cloud? What was your experience?
Yes. So yes, as soon as we started, so cars.com is on a new, a completely new platform. We basically just we rebuilt it starting in 2019, and we basically went live with our launch. We launched in June of 2021. So while we were building everything new on AWS, luckily we had time, right? We had those 2 years. So yes, we were able to basically implement the minimum security baseline. And that's why we are now we're now able to use other services. And those are the services that I listed and that in what's next and more what's next slide, because basically that's where we're at right now.
Thank you. So in the cloud, especially AWS, where you have so many security services, there's Inspector, Shield, Config, WAF. It can be overwhelming for a newcomer to look at the first dashboard when you log into AWS and you have 500 AWS services. What would you recommend to someone who's starting new on their cloud journey
Yes. No, that's a very valid question. I completely get that. I would start, like I said, if you could look at the cloud practitioner certification, again, you don't even have to take the certification, you just have to go through the training. What it does is it actually like makes you, it basically exposes you to the core AWS services. Now, what are the core AWS services? I would start with VPC, which is the network, virtual private cloud. That's what VPC stands for. The EC2, which is your compute, like building virtual machines or VMs or servers. That's EC2, and then S3, which is which obviously is your buckets, your S3 buckets, where you can like put a lot of data, put your object-based files in there. Okay, and then maybe there's a fourth. I would do RDS, because RDS basically is your relational database, and that will give you a very basic idea of how to use a database in the cloud.
Thank you. We have a question in the chat. After logging into AWS, what is the first security thing you should do?
Oh yeah, first thing, disable your root. Remove. Do not stop using the root user. Right. Immediately create a group called admins. Create an IAM user called, whatever your name is. It basically every single IAM user should be user based. It should account for actually one person, and then create a user group. Sorry, I already said that. And then add your administrator's policy, attach that to your user group, and then add whoever users you have to that user group, and then create MFA for your users. Make sure they use MFA, and then start using those IAM users. Do not use your root user anymore. If there's a way for you to change the password of your root user to obviously something that will take 3,000 years to guess, make sure you do that, and then you can actually just lose that password. You don't have to keep it, because if something happens, you can still log in as your IAM user.
Thank you. A question for Fatima, because she's studying, and this is, I don't know if this is her this is her first exposure to the cloud, but what has been her learning experience or onboarding journey with the cloud been like? For anyone who's starting new, if there's anything that she would like to recommend from her experience on her cloud journey.
Yeah, so any recommended experience I would say would be, so when I first started with cars, Stella, she gave me some Udemy practice courses to work on, because I was also new to AWS, and this was my first time operating with AWS. And I think those Udemy courses really helped me. Other than that, I think what I'm learning at my university, so I go to IIT, Illinois Institute of Technology, which is located on the south side of Chicago. We learn a lot about security and network infrastructure. So I think that also kind of plays a role in what I'm doing. Other than that, I think watching a lot of videos just to get the idea of what it is. And yeah, courses, online courses, there's a bunch of free courses you can use. There's also some that you have to pay for, but yeah, I think just utilize your courses and online resources. Do you have anything to add to that, Stella?
Yeah, I think the definitely the cloud practitioner. I think I said it already. Yeah, cloud practitioner would be the easiest, because it's a big start, right? It's a big start. AWS also allows you to spin up an environment, spin up a free account. Basically, you can open up account that's for free. And I think if you use a smaller EC2 instance, there are various levels of free in all of the services. And if you just want to practice, you can basically start your own AWS account for free. And I think you can use it up to a year for free. So yeah, it's pretty easy, pretty easy to start.
That definitely resonates when I started my cloud journey. What are the cloud cybersecurity needs or differences for a startup versus a larger organization?
I think it basically boils down to the services, right? So I think I mentioned there in the design principles that we have, one of the things to do is to layer your security. So the first thing that you have to do in, if you are a more mature organization, is you have more services, you have more layers, you have more basically things to watch out for. You have more things to secure, right? If you're a smaller or a startup, a smaller organization, then you have less things to manage, less things to watch out for. So it's just a matter of it's just like anything that and anything that you that it's pretty. I guess what I'm saying is that it's pretty normal for you to like need more folks in your team as you grow your business. When you're a smaller business, as in there's only one of you, yeah, you can definitely, you still need to do it, but it's a lot less complicated than if you had to manage a lot of services and yeah, and also the tools, right? These tools, not all the tools are free, right? They also cost because they're also services, so they're also on a pay-per-use basis. They're not super expensive though. Like I think Fatima, with all of those things that we looked at Security Hub, right? And it covers like the 2 accounts. I think we paid like $100 a month. It's pretty inexpensive.
Right. Yeah. It's also cost effective. So I think that's why I like using it.
Oh, I think all the free services is mentioned as free on the AWS account, so there should not be that much difficulty. So we have another question. There's a question that you are presenting. I mean, we are done with the good presentation till now, right? So is there any harm in your career with this presentation? Usually, newbies are told to not come ahead with the truth to consider their career progression. So do you think if there is a harm in their career progression?
Sorry, it's a little bit long. I think I see it. Let me go read it really quick. Do you think being completely honest, as you have been in this great presentation, will harm your career in tech, as you have clearly defined the benefits difference between the cloud services? Often newbies are told to hedge and not tell the complete truth to consider their future career progression. I mean, because I define the difference between the cloud services. So as far as the different cloud services are concerned, in theory, so I'll just give you, again, this is all my opinion, right? And based on my experience. So there are people that probably started with Microsoft Azure and they're like, they love it and it's amazing for them and good for them, right? It's like, that's just how it works. It's based on your experience. So in my experience, I started with AWS first. So I think that that's why I am biased. It is also the most mature one. It has the most services, but I'm not saying that you have to use AWS. I feel like if you really want to check out all the different cloud services, go for it. I'm only using AWS because it's the one that I'm most familiar with. I've also worked with GCP and Azure, and again, based on my experience, I prefer AWS. However, I have worked with GCP quite extensively, and they also have a pretty robust set of services. I think their services are some of their services are even better than AWS because it depends on the service, right? So, for example, if you are using, if you're a Kubernetes shop, right, and you have not chosen a cloud provider yet, I would definitely recommend you looking at Google's cloud, because Google is the main proponent of Kubernetes, and they definitely have what do you call this? They have access to a lot more resources when it comes to that technology, and that's only one of the services that I can think of, but there are several of those. So it really depends. Like, and if you're a Microsoft shop, let's say you work for an organization and they're using Microsoft, why would you change everything, right? It may not be in your best interest to change everything. So maybe that's why Azure is there. That's why Microsoft has their own cloud, because it's easy for them to basically just move over to Azure from the traditional on-premise environments. So yeah, again, I'm biased because we use AWS right now for my organization, and it's what I have the most experience with.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Stella. So we have another question. So the next one is the cybersecurity service which you would prefer for social media logins.
Sorry,
So
I got
is
distracted.
it
I was
in
looking.
the voice recognition service?
Oh, I'm sorry. My dog. Give me a second. Okay, where is that, the Q&A or in the chat?
It is in the chat.
Okay.
Yes. So
Can you repeat the
would you
question, please?
recommend any cybersecurity technique or service for social media logins?
Social media logins. Yeah, it's pretty straight for me. It's pretty straightforward. Do not use TikTok, and and the reason is because we don't have, well, not just TikTok, obviously, but generally speaking, if you are going to use social media, you definitely need to use multi-factor authentication, right? So make sure your password is a combo password. It has to have uppercase, lowercase, numbers, and a symbol, right? Then make sure it's at least 12 characters so that nobody can guess it. But if you don't, somehow you're not able to meet that requirement, and make sure that you also have multi-factor authentication. So that's the best thing I can think of. I cannot, I'm a security enthusiast, which means that any social media is not ideal. But right now, I think from what I read, TikTok basically is very vulnerable. So probably stay off TikTok until they figure out a lot of their stuff, security stuff.
I agree, Stella. Thank you for the information. I think we are done from my side. So it was a great presentation, and thank you everybody for joining this session today. I hope that it's helpful information for all of us. And if you're still having any questions, you can anytime ping them in our Slack community, or you can reach out to us on different social media platforms. And I hope that you have a great one.
Yes, I'll also post my slide. I'll send it over to Mayatri, and you'll Women Who Code will definitely publish it. And I'll also be on the Slack channel if you have any questions.